we're going to start now since we have everyone settled in. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's welcome to today's very special anti-war forum, an eyewitness report on the criminal U.S. NATO bombing of Libya, featuring many special guests, including Cynthia McKinney.
Yeah.
I just want to say as a quick reminder to everyone, just for respect for the speakers tonight, to put your phones on vibrate, to turn them off, whichever would be easier. And so we're going to go on. So my name is Sasha, and I'm going to be moderating this panel discussion tonight. I'm a member of the Anti-Coalition here in New York and the CUNY student organizer. In addition to our... In addition to our featured speaker, Ms. McKinney, we are honored to have with us Akbar Muhammed, a national leader for religion, Viola Plummer of the December 12th Coalition, and Brian Becker, national coordinator of the Anti-Coalition. So now just for a few announcements. So we hope this event today will be the beginning of a broader awakening amongst people of this country that the wars must end. There are a number of important events coming up. First, the Anti-Coalition has announced a demonstration to stop the bombing of Libya on July 9th in Washington, D.C. at the White House to bring the urgent anti-war message to President Obama's front door. I'm sure you've all seen the flyer already today. Please make sure you buy a bus ticket today. We're selling tickets this afternoon for a $10 round trip. That's right, good deal. All right, secondly, please mark your calendar for a very important anti-war activity right here in Harlem. August 13th, there's going to be an event happening, which Sister Viola will be talking more about as we hear her speak this afternoon. Also, support the efforts of the United National Anti-War Committee for a demonstration against the war coming up this Monday, June 27th at 4:30. It's going to be at City Hall. And also, I've actually been asked to announce that next Friday, July 1st, the Party for Socialism and Liberation will be holding a forum featuring a presentation on U.S. out of Africa. The PSL is a member group of ANSWER and will be holding the forum in the ANSWER office on 135th Street in Adequate Powell. But before we start, I'd like to take a moment to thank some of the organizations that helped make this event possible. We'd like to give special thanks to our gracious host today, the National Black Theater. And also Director Nami Faison, whose immense help in arranging this event on such short notice. So thank you, Brother Faison. Also, thanks to the co-sponsoring organizations, especially the Nation of Islam and the December 12th movement. So ANSWER stands for Act Now to Stop War and Racism. ANSWER is a coalition of organizations that has been organizing across the country since 2001 to stop the U.S. imperialist wars and occupations, against racist attacks on people of color and immigrants, and in defense of the rights of workers and the poor. ANSWER is proud to be sponsoring this nationwide tour with Cynthia McKinney, and Akbar Muhammed to help spread the truth about the NATO war in Libya. Answer sees that it is of the utmost importance to bring an eyewitness account of the U.S. NATO bombing of Libya to the people of the United States. And we are so glad that you can all join us for what is sure to be an exciting and informative discussion this evening. The U.S. government, their neo-colonial European allies, and the corporate media have been lying to us about Libya. They have carried out a sustained campaign of demonization against Muammar Gaddafi and the majority of the people of Libya in order to whip up domestic support for the latest unjust war. Every day we are told that they are bombing Libya to save Libya, that this military intervention is a humanitarian mission. But there is no such thing as humanitarian intervention for the U.S. government. The U.S. government only intervenes to advance their own strategic interests. This means the interests of big oil, Wall Street bankers, and massive corporations. U.S. intervention will never bring democracy or freedom to the Libyan people. Remember, this is the same government that funded and supported Egyptian dictator Hosni Mubarak and to the last minute of his corrupt rule. This government also supports the monarchy in Saudi Arabia, one of the most repressive regimes on the planet. Not to mention that they support the brutal Israeli occupation of Palestine. Progressive people must tear the mask off the phony humanitarian slogans being used by the White House, the Secretary of State, and the Pentagon about their deep concern for the fate of the Libyan people. The reality is that Libya has the largest oil reserves in Africa. Washington knows this. It would like nothing more than to have a stable client in place that would allow U.S. bases on the ground and control of the oil supply. It's that simple. Additionally, weapons contractors make millions off every bomb that is dropped in Libya, in Afghanistan, and in Iraq. And just as Dr. King once said, the bombs they are dropping on Libya are exploding in our communities here at home. We have 50% unemployment here in Harlem. Imagine how many jobs could be created with the funds for war. How many schools and hospitals have been closed down? How many jobs have been lost? And how many desperately needed public health initiatives have been shut down right here in New York because, as our state and federal government tells us, there is not enough money to fund them. There is enough money, brothers and sisters. They can't say there is no money when the Pentagon has an unlimited supply. It is just being used to fund war. Whenever they decide to invade, bomb, occupy, and terrorize another country, they somehow always find enough money. And it is people like us, poor and working people, here in New York and Libya too, who pay the price. And so we are standing in solidarity with our sisters and brothers in Libya, and we are fighting back. ANSA has been at the forefront of the movement to defend Libya's right of sovereignty, to oppose U.S. or European intervention in Libya since before the bombing even began. On March 17th, as soon as the news said that they would be implementing a no-fly zone, which we recognize as a precursor to war, we put out a statement against intervention. We have published many statements about the aims of U.S. imperialism in Libya, the real history of the region, and the necessity of standing in solidarity with the Libyan people since then. On March 19th, we had demonstrations all over the country to mark the 8th anniversary of the Iraq War. At each of these demonstrations, we raised the demand, no U.S. intervention in Libya, though we were sharply criticized by many in the anti-war movement for doing so. We did not waver. In fact, when the bombing began, we called emergency demonstrations in every city, in which we're present for the week of March 23rd to the 26th, to demand an end to the bombing of Libya. Hundreds of people were mobilized. We organized demonstrations at the White House in DC, Times Square in New York, and LA, to name a few. We are also proud to be hosting this speaking tour in many cities around the country. We are committed to organizing, spreading the word, and taking to the streets to fight back against U.S. intervention in Libya, as long as the bombing continues and until the right to self-determination for the people of Libya is upheld. The reality is that the people of the United States do not want a war with Libya. Despite all of the lies and propaganda, people in the United States still oppose this war by a margin of 2-1, according to the latest polls. Our government wants regime change. They want super profits for big oil and Wall Street, while we have nothing to gain from that. We want jobs here in the U.S., healthcare, housing, education, and an end to imperialist intervention all over the world. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us here today. Okay, so before we get into our program, I'm going to actually, as we know, Ms. Cynthia McKinney traveled with the Dignity delegation, and we're going to actually have one of the members who traveled with her, Mr. Don DeBar, come up and speak briefly.
Back in the summer of 2009, I got a note from Representative McKinney asking me if I would be interested in taking a trip to Tripoli with a delegation of American journalists and activists who were going to attend an international conference to discuss third way politics and economics. And I said yes, almost immediately. I'd never been to Africa before that, and I'd never been to a Middle Eastern country before that. And I've had particular interest in Libya as a nation that is outside of the paradigm of imperialism, and I wanted to see on the ground what life was like for everyday Libyans. So in October of 2009, I left. I was fortunate enough to spend the time traveling with Mike Ford and from the Like Agenda Report, Wayne Madsen from the Wayne Madsen Report, Bob Fitrakis from the Free Press in Ohio, Pat Hill, an activist from Chicago, and a number of others. There were 13 of us in all, I believe, and of course Representative McKinney. And we spent, I think, 5 days in Tripoli, and I took my trusty little video camera out on the street for 2 of the days that we were there, and I had an opportunity to walk around and speak with Libyans who lived in Tripoli to get an idea of what their life was like. And in the back of my mind, I was trying to find out what is it about Libya exactly that has provoked so much hostility from the officialdom here, who generally only have hostility for those who seek to assert their own rights against imperialism. What I found out was the following. Number one, housing is a human right in Libya. Everyone owns their home. The idea of a landlord is as alien to them as it was to the Chinese in the late 40s when the solution to the problem with landlords was to execute them. Something you can take to the rent control board. You don't have a mortgage on your house. You just own your home. And the homes are nice. In Tripoli, the housing stock is equivalent to the better housing stock in New York. There's no rats and roaches. There's no crumbling walls and abandoned buildings. Rather, the housing is adequate and comfortable and owned by the people that live in it. That's the first thing I learned. Secondly, I learned that healthcare is free and universal. And the facilities, as I saw later, particularly from some video that you'll see here, but also from research that I did, the facilities are comparable to those in the United States, to the average hospitals that exist in, say, suburban America, like Westchester, Nassau County, and such. And for those services that are not available, they send you abroad at the government's expense and obtain treatment for you. This is for an average Libyan. It's the second thing I learned. The third thing that I learned is that the oil revenue that comes into the country is distributed to the people of Libya on a monthly basis. The households get an average of between $1,000 and $3,000 a month to live on. Now, the cost of food there is cheaper than it is here, and it's plentiful. It was plentiful before the bombing and the blockade. Available widely. There are many small restaurants and food stands and other things like you see in New York City and other places, but the food is affordable to all Libyans, and they partake of it. The average person is out in the street in the evening, eating in a small restaurant, walking, grabbing a pita bread with food in it or whatever. Unfortunately, what I learned was that there's no alcohol available like in other Muslim countries. But also, apparently, they don't have a problem with alcohol abuse because the lives of the people there are not occupied with survival. The people actually have housing, food, clothing, and health care available to them without stress. Also promoted heavily is the idea of small business. In the Green Book, which is a philosophical tract that lays out the philosophical foundations, more or less, of the society. It's not the Bible, but it's a way of thinking that many people describe to there. The idea of wage labor is synonymous with the idea of slavery. And so it is highly discouraged. There are some industries where, of course, large industries where it's necessary, but there are accommodations made to people there to protect their rights that unions here, if they worked for them for 1,000 years, would be proud to obtain, and in the 150 years of the union movement here, they have yet to obtain. And finally, to deal with the idea that was widely publicized here through Al Jazeera, which is actually a mouthpiece for the Qatar regime, the monarchy in Qatar, and Al Arabiya, which is a mouthpiece for the Saudi regime. Pacifica Radio runs an hour and a half now of Al Jazeera. They are basically the mouthpiece for a backwards Middle Eastern monarchy, and that is passing for their progressive programming. You should be aware of that. But the picture that's painted is quite different from that that's on the ground. I would like to ask people that are here that have any contact with WBAI or Democracy Now! In particular, to ask them to stop shilling for the CIA and the United States, and ask them to start covering things like this, because the record so far, Libya and Democracy Now! Has been shilling for the U.S. attack on Africa since it first began in Cote d'Ivoire overtly. I mean, the U.S. has been attacking Africa since its foundation. But Cote d'Ivoire, they have made way for imperialism to take control of, and they are now shilling for the CIA in Libya. And I ask you to please tell them that's not good for you, you're not going to sit for it, and if it's necessary to defund Pacifica from your donations, please do it. Thank you.
All right, so thank you for that. So our next speaker for tonight is Viola Plummer. She's chair of the December 12th movement, spokesperson for the reparations movement, and a veteran and the anti-imperialist and liberation fighter. Please welcome Sister Viola.
Whenever I come to NBT, this particular light stays in my eyes, so I can't see any of you. Now, y'all won't mind if I move away from that. See, and when December 12 folks say to the brother that we're going to be here, and I always have a problem with that light, because I can't see. And it's a little difficult for me to talk to people I can't see. So I'm moving this. Is that a problem? That's okay. And I'm not going to be long because I think Sasha laid out why we are here. And I think also that Don raised one or two points that I want to get back to quickly. One is Amy Goodman, WBAI, and Don said that she began to take the CIA's coverage with Côte d'Ivoire. No, that began many months ago, many years ago. I come out of the African Liberation Support Committee. I'm a black nationalist, and I make no apologies for that. I am a communist too, and I think that needs to be clear. One does not obviate the other. So that in the struggle for the liberation of Africa, Amy Goodman and WBAI was always on the opposite side. That if there were two liberation movements, they chose the one that was always supported by the United States government and the CIA. And I say that without any fear of contradiction. Second point I want to raise is that we are indeed honored to be a part of this particular struggle against imperialist war, and in particular, the war against Libya. Because those of us in the African Liberation Movement, we've had any number of visits and interaction with Libya, the people of Libya, for years. Because we've always been on the side of African liberation. And so when the discussion was heard around a no-fly zone, euphemism for how is it we cover our aggression against Libya for a number of reasons. And I don't know if those of you were privy to the presentation that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan gave. He meticulously laid out every reason why the no-fly zone read aggression against Libya. One of the things for us in the African Liberation Movement is that Africans here have got to be mobilized. It is not sufficient to join other coalitions. It's not sufficient. It's necessary. It's not sufficient. That if we are Africans, and we are, if we are Africans, they're attacking our homeland. I'm sure you've read about the illegal sanctions on Zimbabwe. One of the first of the Africans that they began to demonize because President Robert Mugabe had the temerity to take back the land that was stolen from the Zimbabwean people. He was demonized, and he was demonized by a lot of progressive people, because the rap was he stole the election. That was in the main, that he stole the election, and that here was a legitimate opposition party called the Movement for Democratic Change. And the leader of this creation by the West, Morgan Shangarai, was a labor leader. He was a worker. How can you, December 12th movement, etc., oppose MDC, who represents the masses of working people? They never bothered to say who organized MDC. Who is MDC? Where was Shanghai during the War of National Liberation? Where was he? How all of a sudden he can fly to every capital in Europe and the United States? He's a worker, not a union. And see, for some of us, or I should say, for some of them, if not for some of you, the magic word is labor union that exonerates the likes of Morgan Shanghai. But we knew who he was because we were on the ground in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Angola, Guinea-Bissau. When the wars of liberation were being fought, we were there. We never knew Shanghai, but we knew our president, Robert Gabriel Mugabe. And we knew that Mugabe was for the Zimbabwean people. And our contradiction with Mugabe was that he went to Lancaster to assume that there was a drop of integrity by the United States and the UK, and that they were going to arrange a way in which the Zimbabwean people could get back their land. Our position was, you can never, ever, ever embrace thieves. Ever. No matter how they come. Minister Farrakhan said in his speech, and I hope you get it, have they changed? Have they changed? Have they changed since the transatlantic slave trade? Have they changed? They haven't changed in the communities in which I come from. And the wars that they wage against the masses of people on earth, they're thieves. They're thieves. And so, there has to be a response. There has to be a response by Africans here, by Africans throughout the world, and the response that has to be is that we will not accept regime change in Libya, neither will we accept it in Zimbabwe. They have no right to dictate who is going to lead. So what we have said is that not only does imperialism exist throughout the world, but its brutal manifestation, its rapacious capitalism under the leadership right here in New York City of Michael Bloomberg exists right here for us. And so that those of us here in New York, we have got to come together, yes, in the millions, and say no bombing in Libya, that you must remove the illegal sanctions in Zimbabwe. And that no layoffs, don't threaten us. Right? Don't close our schools.
Don't fire our teachers.
Don't fire our teachers. Don't end the tricks You got to get hip to the tricks. And as we move along in this organizing, December 12th movement is going to have some forums and discussions about Bloomberg's trips and budgets and money that is here, that's not there, etc., etc., etc. We are organizing right here in Harlem. We need the millions of you. See, everybody that you're sitting next to, just lean to him or her and say, all we need you to bring out is 200,000 people. That each one of them. And it's August 13th.
August 13th.
It is August 13th. And it's a very, very simple demand. And that is stop the bombing in Libya. There will be no regime change there. Stop the illegal sanctions of Zimbabwe. Don't even try regime change in Zimbabwe. See, black folks ain't gonna have it. Straight up. And I know I'm talking, but it's just, I'm sorry. When they convinced Brother Gaddafi to give up his shit, I'm sorry. When they convinced Brother Gaddafi to give up his defenses, and he did, because he thought you could trust thieves. When they convinced him to give that up, and he did, that's when they moved. Right? They could never convince the defense forces of Zimbabwe to lay down their arms and join MDC or the CIA or any of the rest of them. Not going to happen. But in order to make that clear, we have to have all of you in the street. Can you all say August 13th?
August 13th.
And you know where I come from, you gotta talk loud, because those of us who see my hand and stuff may be hard of hearing. So, August 13th.
August 13th.
Can't hear you.
August 13th.
Can't hear that.
August 13th.
August 13th, 110th Street and Malcolm X. See all of you there. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Viola. That was very inspiring. August 13th. All right, so our next speaker is Becker. Brian is a national coordinator for the Answer Coalition. He has been a featured commentator and a voice of opposition to the wars against Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya, as well as a principal organizer for some of the largest anti-war demonstrations in the last 2 decades. Please welcome Brother Brian.
Well, I see what Viola means, that you really can't see anybody. Sisters and brothers, we're very proud that we've been able to work this past week with Akbar and Cynthia McKinney and others. We've been in Los Angeles on Saturday, San Francisco on Tuesday, Chicago on Wednesday, Washington, D.C. on Friday, today here in New York, tomorrow in Syracuse. And you can see there's a good turnout, and there's been a good turnout everywhere. Last night we had more than 250 in Washington, D.C. No corporate media, by the way. And I think the reason the turnout has been strong is that while the official voices of opposition to the extent that they supposedly exist, have been so muted. The people of this country really want to hear the truth. And that's why Cynthia McKinney's trip is so important. That's why we have to not only hear her, but support her. Because it takes a lot of courage, a lot of tenacity to raise the money or to borrow the money, to go to Libya, to stay there, to see what the people in Libya, in Tripoli in particular, are experiencing, and then to be able to come back as a chronicler, as an observer, as someone who can present not rhetoric but facts to say what's actually going on. And as we've been going along the tour, interestingly, not surprisingly, but interestingly, we've been confronted by fairly significant counter-demonstrators. But we weren't demonstrating, we were speaking. They were the demonstrators. In San Francisco, there were about 200. In LA, about 100. In Chicago, maybe 150. Smaller number in Washington, and I don't know if they've ventured to come here tonight. There's probably a few.
No, they don't roll like that here.
Yeah. And so they've been, of course, trying to disrupt and harass and threaten the tour, unsuccessfully, I would say, because of the militant response from the people who came, who wanted to defend this tour. But I want to address one of the arguments that they make, and that's the argument that resonates everywhere in the corporate media, that this bombing campaign, and authorized by Resolution 1973 of the Security Council, you know, that great authoritative democratic body, authorized with 6 abstentions, by the way, that said that the military action could be used to protect civilians, and that if the United Nations hadn't authorized it, if NATO hadn't initiated military activities, there would have been a massacre in Benghazi, that the Libyan military and the militias and the people's fighters were poised to carry out the elimination of rebel forces, and it would be a human massacre in Benghazi, and that's why it was necessary. And I want to address that question, because when we talk to our coworkers and fellow students and people in our neighborhood, they may hear that argument. Let's just assume it's true. Let's just assume for a second that there was going to be a decisive military victory by the Libyan forces, and there would have been a large number of people in Benghazi killed. Would that be the reason that the United States government, the greatest enslaver of Africa, or the British and French governments, the greatest colonizers of Africa, would have gone to war in Africa because they were concerned about the deaths of certain Africans in the eastern part of Libya? Isn't it all credible that they would begin a massive bombing campaign because of some pure and noble motive to save the people in Libya or any part of Africa, when we know that for 400 years these are the same forces that have pillaged and plundered Africa? Before they can pretend to care about Africa, they need to pay reparations to Africa, because that's what we're paying. There are no pure, noble motives by the imperialists when they conquer and pillage and plunder. They said they had a noble cause in Iraq, and there's 1 million Iraqis dead, and 5 million refugees, and a beautiful country shredded. They said they had a noble cause to stop terrorism by invading and occupying Afghanistan. Recently there was a poll taken in the southern part of Afghanistan. 92% of the males of fighting age in southern Afghanistan had never heard of the World Trade Center, had never heard about September 11th. They didn't carry out this attack, and yet tens of thousands of Afghans are dead. If the United States wants to pretend to care about the lives of Arab or Muslim or African people, put George W. Bush on trial for war crimes. They know, as Sasha said so well, that Libya has the largest oil reserves in all of Africa, the 9th largest oil reserves in the world. If no new oil fields were discovered in Libya, and many will be discovered, but if no new oil fields were discovered, at the current rate of production, Libya has enough oil to produce at this level for the next 63 years. That's a prize that ExxonMobil, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, Eni in Italy, and the others won. They didn't start to carry out regime change in late February or March. In April 1986, they carried out the attempted assassination of Gaddafi with U.S. Air Force planes. They bombed his house then. He wasn't about to, quote, massacre a group in Benghazi. They've been trying to carry out regime change in Libya since the 1969 revolution, when Libya stood up and said, Libya belongs to Libyans. And our message with this tour is that the Libyan people are our sisters and brothers, not our enemies. That you may not have seen it in the Western media because it wasn't presented in the Western media, but on June 17th, 1 million people in Tripoli demonstrated against the NATO bombing. Now, were they all Gaddafi supporters? Undoubtedly, many of them had grievances against Gaddafi. Gaddafi supporters, some who were critics, but 1 million people, an ocean of humanity, whether they believed in Gaddafi or didn't believe in Gaddafi, they believed that the NATO bombing should end, and with them we must stand in solidarity. So sisters and brothers, on Monday there's going to be the demonstration downtown called by the United Anti-War Committee. We have bus tickets so that people can go to Washington, D.C. and not let the White House off the hook. On July 9th, we're going to have people from all over with banners and signs saying, stop the bombing of Libya. But the big demonstration will culminate, as Viola said, right here in Harlem, August 13th. And that's a demonstration which we can make to be a historic event. Thank you very much.
So, we're going to now go to our next speaker. And before, actually, when I was thinking, our speakers, I actually didn't mention this person, and I'm sorry for that. But it actually is someone who needs very little introduction. I have the honor of presenting to you tonight the former U.S. Attorney General, and for many years a voice of opposition to U.S. wars for empires, Ramsey Clark. Amen.
Many years ago, there was an American humorist, probably the only one old enough to remember his name, Robert Benchley. Oh, yeah. And he could make an audience fall out of their chair just by raising one eyebrow. And he'd often begin speeches by saying, before I make my speech, I want to say something. Well, I really want to say something before I make my speech. For decades now, we've had a singular moral leader in this country that has been right on all the important issues and exhausted herself in their pursuit. I call her Sister Courage, Cynthia McKinney. All right. before she was in the house, while she was in the house, and since she was in the house, she's been Sister Courage for you and for me and for everybody in this world. And we owe her a great debt. And I think it's only the beginning for our sister. Brian mentioned that we bombed Libya in 1986. We've been on their case since Gaddafi first took the leadership there, because he replaced our agent, so to speak. In Egypt, right next door, we've had, since Nasser, Sadat and Mubarak, for decades, driving the great Egyptian people into deeper poverty. And our country waited until it was impossible to sustain Mubarak over the lives of 90 million Egyptians to walk away from him. We always worried about Gaddafi because he was a man that followed his own conscience, believed in the people. One early morning, it was about 1 a.m., planes that took off from Lakenheath Air Force Base in England, they had to be refueled 6 times in flight. They flew clear around the Iberian Peninsula because they couldn't fly any of the European, Western European countries at that time. Came in through Gibraltar, came off the sea, 100 feet off the sea, in a surprise attack. And the first 4 planes out of a wave of 40 hit right at the compound that we've seen so much in TV these last weeks. They hit his office. They hit the tent he liked to meet people in and be a Bedouin again out in the compound there. They hit his home, killed the youngest child in the family. They hit downtown, badly damaged 4 embassies, including the French embassy, sheared the whole back side of it off. Killed hundreds of people. Aircraft off of U.S. aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean. Fiercely bombed Benghazi at the same time. But the surprise attack, the first wave, was an assassination attempt. It failed. It wasn't the first. It wasn't the last before this time. But as much as anything, it tells you that until the United States reduces its military spending to support our economics and moral aggressions around the world, we will be a menace to life on the planet. We'll reduce 90%. When you look at the money we spend on just the Trident nuclear fleets that could destroy life on the planet, 1 submarine, there are 8 at sea all time on alert in the Pacific alone. 140 to 145 nuclear warheads, the largest 145 kilotons, more than 60 times the size of the bomb, the power of the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. 1 sub could launch 140, 145 towards the center of the human population and create a crater that we're now told would be 50 miles in diameter. What a madness. Totally out of control. It's our military spending, it sees that of all the other countries combined. The guns on both sides of these wars come from us primarily. The major cause for it is all so that we can exploit the rest of the peoples. Any head of government that stands up for his people against the will of the United States and its economic interest is in deep trouble. and we'll kill them if we can. The bombing is not only to assassinate him, though, it's to weaken the widespread support that he has, take the people down. We never learned. You remember the saying in Vietnam, you have to destroy the village to save them? We're going to kill the civilians to save them, don't we? It seems to be the only way we know. And it's our responsibility, we the people, to do something about it. Hopefully, and God knows we have to pray and do all we can in our might, we can save this government in Libya. The government of and by and for the people. But it's even more than that. And it's even more than the oil. There has been no leader for a united Africa that has worked as hard or devoted as much time as time to find the cruelly and almost unbearably impoverished people of Africa than Colonel Gaddafi, as they call him. He's had far greater interest in the African Union as a viable, effective institution for the peoples, and particularly of sub-Saharan Africa. He doesn't pay much attention to the Arab Union. He thinks they're a bunch of oil magnates. He's got it right. He's for the African continent, its independence. His closest international advisor, Ali Treki, who was the last two presidents of the African Union, his single purpose of helping unite the people to throw off the oppressors that are exploiting their soil. What incredible audacity that we would say we have to intervene to save civilians in Libya. What have we done in eastern Congo where several million people have been massacred? Black people massacred, left to die. What do we do in Rwanda? It's up to us to come to grips with what our nation has become on earth. And that is, as Martin Luther King said in the Riverside Church just over here on the Hudson in 1967. My own country is the greatest purveyor of violence on earth. The act of passage to purvey violence in 1967 was puny compared to what it is now. We keep finding more and more money and the sophisticated means of killing. The theory of the drones, we had a really interesting case up in Las Vegas, was wound up this January of this year against the drones. But you can't think about the drones or study the technique or the growing technology. They're like the Wright brothers airplane right now. What they're trying to develop is a capacity to punch a button and kill anybody they selected, any place they happen to be on Earth at that moment. That's how the drones operate. From Creech Air Base at this time, we in Las Vegas, about 40 miles, so the guys can go down and gamble when they're not on duty. That's where they punch the buttons, fire the bombs, they kill the 7 or 8 civilians who are in the house where they think a bad guy is injured, you know. So much for sovereignty. Doesn't matter whether it's Yemen or Afghanistan or Pakistan. Wait till Pakistan breaks open. We'll learn something about mass violence then. You and I have miles to go before we sleep. And we have to support our sister courage in this effort to save Libya, to save ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you again for that wonderful presentation. And So we're almost coming to a close, but we do have, of course, our keynote speaker. But before we get to her, our next speaker is Akbar Muhammed. Mr. Muhammad is a national leader in the Nation of Islam. And as a student, he studied under Malcolm X, and he currently writes a regular column titled Africa and the World, which appears in over 100 African-American newspapers nationwide. So once again, let's welcome Akbar Muhammed.
Thank you. First and foremost, I'd like to say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Muslims say, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
And it's almost a common term among our people now. First, I want to thank Allah for blessing me to be here this afternoon. And we've been on a long journey across the country, and it's been exciting. So I'm going to borrow from Ramsey Clark. Before I deliver my speech, I want to make a few comments. Okay? But I want to do two things. First, I want to mention in the audience is Bob Law. And I want to thank Bob for being here. Believes in building consciousness, and it's most important. And those of us who are old warriors, we have to prepare the younger people coming behind us. Yes. We prepare them by giving them information. A lot of this they did not live through. They heard about it. They may have read at it. They may have looked at something on television. But there's nothing like a one-on-one mentor. In our community, we call it war stories. You know, old Willie telling his war stories. But these war stories are important to inspire the young people. I want to recognize Brother Leroy, his radio show every Sunday. All of those who go on the radio, all of those who work and struggle to build consciousness among our people. It's very important. Do not let it go. And I want to thank the brothers of the FOI for your efforts with the Final Call newspaper in the street. Because the Muhammad Speaks that started it all, it started right here in New York City. Malcolm in late 58 produced a copy. Maybe that stayed around for 3 or 4 months. By 59, Malcolm got together with Louis Lomax. And in 1960, we were producing the Muhammad Speaks in New York. And what made the Muhammad Speaks, not just our dialogue, our trying to bring you into what we believe, but what made it was the international thrust in that paper. We had a great writer from New York, and many of you know him, Joe Walker. And Joe Walker went throughout the world. Now, many of the young people don't know Joe Walker. They don't know the history of that. Because all of our early editors of the Muhammad Speaks were socialist brothers who believed in the struggle of the masses. And they helped that paper with that projection, which is very important. These are my before comments, Brian, so I just want to make them. So I want to thank the brothers because this is what Minister Farrakhan is trying to create with the current Final Call newspaper, international news, news that affects the communities across America. And we're the only national black newspaper in America. And it's our cadre, our brothers, who are in the streets selling that paper, that makes it possible for us to reach 163 communities across this country. Now, the mainstream press has not covered. We've been in, as Brian said, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, New York today, Syracuse. Tomorrow we've had good crowds. And at many of the, as Brian mentioned, there were Libyan brothers and sisters, and I will call those who are working for the State Department brothers and sisters, because they're not conscious. And somebody has to bring them to a level of consciousness, and the only way it can happen is you got to give them that history. You know, I lived in Africa for 12 years, and one thing I learned, Africans are high on symbolism. but they all have the Sankofa, meaning you got to go back to your roots to understand what's going on today. And many of our young brothers and sisters don't understand. So let me go through this. Cynthia McKinney is here. I take my hat off to her. I didn't know that when we were in Libya in January, right before all of this broke out, that was her first trip. And Brother Gaddafi received us. And he was working on the migration problem with the Africans flowing to Europe and the Italians putting them in jail and the mistreatment of Africans across Europe. And the Europeans were on Libya because Libya was a jump-off point, because Libya has open borders with Niger, which is right south of Libya. Brothers from Ghana go through Burkina Faso on what we call trotros. Then they reach the border of Niger. They walk across the desert. This is how bad it is on the African continent. And they're not just doing that because they have nothing else to do. They want to feed their family. And the borders of Libya were wide open from the sanction days. And the brothers would get to Libya, work for a while, accumulate money, pay $2,000 to one of these little boats, get on the boat, sail into Europe somewhere, and get and run through Europe to get jobs to send back money. There was a front page article on the New York Times last week about the suffering of the Africans across Europe. Gaddafi called a conference so that he could try to help with this problem. He went to the European Union and Italy. They offered him $6 billion if he would help with the African migrants in Europe. He said he needed $16 billion, but he would help anyway. And he tried to set up camps in Libya when they deport them from Europe. Then he would give them training. They can go back home or try to get jobs. Now this is the part of it that the press doesn't cover and you don't know about. So Brian, I'm talking to Brian now, but I want to get my earlier comments. Now we just heard from Ramsey Clark. And I would hope and pray, I don't know if Roger is here, but is Roger here? Okay, Roger, I would hope and pray that our current Attorney General, Eric Holder, will take a page from Ramsey Clark. And, the way that he can take that page, Cynthia, we've been inside by being an elected politician in the House, and you know what's happening inside. And once you saw what was happening inside, how they came together to roll you out of your seat, how they used the power of the press to shape an image of people they want to get rid of. Eric Holder is inside right now, but he's a conscious brother. And it's what we need now is a mid-course maneuver by the president and the attorney general. But once they get inside and they're out of office, will they commit themselves to use the knowledge that they have gained to become an individual like Ramsey Clark, 82 years old, and his mind is still as sharp as a baby. We would hope that Barack Obama, who made a misstep, now all of us were impressed with him. All of us had hope in him. You say, well, not me, Akbar. I knew that he had something that wasn't right there. But look at his tremendous history. And you have to know the history, even though Jerome Cosi and Obama Nation was writing, the right wing and some of the Tea Party people funded him as they did with Kerry with the Swift boat. This is the same Dr. Jerome Cosi that did the Swift boat on Kerry. He did Obama Nation. But there was information in there that was good for all of us. How Barack Obama's father got to America. Kenya became independent in 1963, and on the Muhammed speech we had a beautiful picture of Jomo Kenyatta. But you got to remember, Bob, you can remember this, when you went to the movie, and we saw 2 movies here in New York, and in between they had a newsreel, and it was usually about the world, and they showed in the mid-50s, 52, 53, 54, this is for the over-the-hill gang in the room. They understand what I'm talking about. And they would show this movie reel, and they would show in Kenya, there was these terrible people called Mau Mau. And they were vicious, and they were killing poor white folks who just wanted to farm in Kenya. And they were taking blood oaths and killing. They showed this on the screen. And I sat there and looked at it in amazement that they were mainly among the Kikuyu. And then when Kenya becomes independent, they show the same people as the liberators, as the ones who were struggling. And I'm saying this about the press because Barack Obama comes from a period when the Kikuyus became the leaders of the government, and the Luau, which is the second group, they were not in power, but the Kennedy family is the one that looked at how Jomo Kenyatta didn't have people who had the intellectual capacity to run the government, so he started sending young students to school. And most of them went to Uganda, to Makerere University. But Uganda was run by Milton Obote, who was a Marxist. And America looked at this in the middle of the Cold War. I wish I had more time to deal with it. So they didn't want to see all of these young Kenyans coming under the sway of Milton Obote in Uganda. Uganda became independent in 1961. October the 9th, 1961, and so they were independent 2 years before Kenya, so the students were coming, but the Kennedy family decided, let us bring some students to America. And so they got a plane load. Now all of this is in a book called Obama Nation, you can read it. The Kennedy financed it, and they went and picked up a lot of people in a lot of luau's, and in that group was Barack Obama Sr., Barack Obama's father. They dropped him off at universities across America. His father ended up in Hawaii. And you know, a little young white girl from Kansas went to Hawaii to go to school, and the rest is history. So now here you have Barack Obama. But Barack became Barry Obama. And he was in Hawaii. But then he came to New York. He came here. And then he began to read Langston Hughes, James Baldwin. He began to read Du Bois. He began to read the life of Paul Robeson. Two of the greatest intellects that we ever produced was W.E.B. Du Bois and Paul Robeson. And Barack Obama became conscious. And instead of becoming Barry Obama, he said, my name is Barack Obama, a Swahili word that means blessed. And Hussein is my middle name, and he began to pick that up. So he became conscious. And so those at the universities began to look at him and how could they cultivate this very brilliant black man. But Barack Obama made a misstep. And the misstep was the bombing of a nation of 6 million people of Libya, thinking that it would be over in a couple of weeks. Now what Barack Obama to save Barack Obama, he needs what you call, when you send a rocket up, he needs a mid-course maneuver. Can we get him back on the path? Can we help the brother out? And so when we have this rally August the 13th in Harlem, it's saying, Barack, you won't get 97% on this trip around. We don't know, and we're working to make sure that you have some respect for us. If you're dependent on that, he went to Puerto Rico because he wants to solidify that Puerto Rican vote. But if he really went there as a conscious brother, he should say, I'm working on freeing you so that we can make Puerto Rico an independent country and not a colony of America. So these are just my open notes. But I'm going to try to make this quick so we can bring on Cynthia. I just want to mention some things. Target Gaddafi, I mentioned this last night in Washington, that you have to go back, the miracle of the internet. It is a miracle. There's no reason for ignorance today. If there's any subject you want to know, you can look it up. Now, Ramsey Clark mentioned how the planes had to fly around Portugal and Spain and France. That's why when they got to Libya in 1986, they bombed the French embassy, because the French wasn't going along with what they were doing at that time. But if you read Target Gaddafi by Seymour Hersh, excellent article, you can go on February 1987, New York Times Magazine on a Sunday. And if you go and read that, you'll see that there's always been an attempt to hit Gaddafi. It's always been an attempt to cultivate Libyans who were dissatisfied with him. And you know how the CIA works that. And so the thing that I learned as going back and forth to Libya, and my respect and love for Muammar Gaddafi, is because when nobody would help the Nation of Islam, in the early 70s. Muammar Gaddafi said the Al-Qaeda, he didn't say the Al-Qaeda is off, I want to see, what is their Islam. He saw a revolutionary group in America that had an impact on the black community, and he knew the legacy of the Nation of Islam from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad through the period of Malcolm. He understood that, and he stepped forward to help the Nation of Islam. And we would be, one thing that Allah, God, frowns on is ingratitude. And now that Brother Gaddafi is struggling for his own survival, we would see which way the wind is blowing. And then jump ship. Because they thought it would be over in 3 weeks. And I know that Tracy is crying in his coffee and his tea this morning. I know that Musa Kosa got problems. We haven't heard from him because the Americans convinced them that this would be over in 3 weeks. It would be all over. Gaddafi would be out. We'll make a way for him to go to Niger, or they love him there, or go to Chad, or somewhere else, or go to Mali, or even go to Russia or Belarus. And we will take over Libya, seize the oil fields. We will cultivate a relationship with these rebels, and we will try to keep them from fighting with one another as what happened in Afghanistan after the Americans left and the Russians pulled out. So this is what the case is, and I want to try to walk through this. It's called, there's a term called mushroom management. Anybody know what mushroom management is? You grow mushrooms in a dark place, a cave, and you feed them, the word we would say is BS, but you feed them poppycock, okay? And mushroom management means you keep them in the dark and feed them BS. And this is what's happening with the American people through the press. You keep them in the dark and you feed them BS. And you can see it clearly with the case of Wheeler. All of this talk about his wiener. I mean, who the hell cares about his wiener when the world is going to hell? There's unemployment, our communities are in shambles, and the press feeds you that, and you glued to that. While America's spending $10 million a day helping to bomb Libya, and they led the bombing of Libya. And they're spending this money while we're suffering in our community. Imagine what $10 million could do in the inner city for summer jobs while children and programs and so forth. So the government has to listen to you. Brother Farrakhan had a major press conference, and the tapes are available outside, but I want you to get the DVD and have a discussion around it. I've been with him a long time. And as far as an international speech goes, this was one of his absolute best. He covered the gamut. He walked through it. He showed America's backside. And there is a couple of books I want to mention before I close this out. I'm there, Viola, don't worry, I'm going to get there. But two books in particular. One is called Washington Rules, and Bracevich is his name. And how many know that book? Anybody know that book in the audience? There's a line in there when Eisenhower was going out. Eisenhower was warning the American people and the establishment, beware of the military-industrial complex. And what he was saying, that we will move to war in order to feed that monster. So America now engaged in 3 wars, spending billions of dollars. When I read in the Times the other day that $18 billion got ripped off in Iraq, American money. And it wasn't just ripped off by the Iraqis now. That was them American boys over there who was taking that money. One of them got busted. $18 billion in Iraq. And then there's more contractors than there are soldiers in Iraq. The black man who built the new American embassy in Iraq, if there was 2 black men involved, whether you know it or not, they got busted out. One of them had to quit. But these were multi-billion-dollar projects. Now, I want to just go through this one quickly. Mushroom management of the American people. And what it is to keep you in the dark and feed you all of the garbage. Now, look at what's happening in Libya right now. Brian, you said it right. Nearly 1 million people in Green Square. Those who have been to Libya, you know where Green Square is. Gaddafi speaking. But yet and still, all of the press is in Libya. CNN, BBC, ABC. They got correspondents in Tripoli, not just in Benghazi, but look at the reports that come to you from Tripoli, but everything slants towards Benghazi. We were at a meeting last night in Washington, and they said to Cynthia McKinney, why don't you come to Benghazi? And they talked about how they would finance it. We'll get the State Department to bring you there. And everybody laughed. Because the State Department is behind the people in Benghazi. We told the brothers from Libya who were in the audience, who tried to use some of the old tricks that we used in the old days. We're old warriors, we know those tricks. One man, when I'm speaking, he gets up and he shouts, so. And we tell him to sit down, this is a meeting. Then another group over here said, let him speak, let him speak. And they tried this in all of the venues. But it so happened that in a couple of the venues, the FOI was very strong there. And they looked like they were eating nails, and they wasn't taking no prisoners. And so we said that if you don't get it right, we will extort you out of here. And so what I did is I offered them a challenge. I said, this is our meeting. Answer set these meetings up. They paid for the tickets. They made it happen. If you go and get yourself a meeting and invite us, and I'll come and talk to you. I'll meet you on your ground and talk to you about your own country. So I want to conclude on 2 points. And Bobby, there's a conclusion. Last night I described our first engagement with Libya. And the reason I'm using this is because the press has a way, and this is why some of the stations, BAI, and last night it came up with Amy Goodman, because sometimes you become shaky in what you believe. You're fed so much information, you start believing it. And then you're unsure of where to go and what to believe. If you want to believe that Gaddafi is a bloodthirsty terrorist and he's killed people, and they were only trying to save the people, then when the people of North Korea were starving, why did you go in there and bomb North Korea and put sanctions on them and say that we got to save the civilians of North Korea? When the outbreak in Rwanda, when that plane went down and that broke out, why did America go in there and save the people? And it's today a black man in the White House is being used for an agenda. The second book is called The Empire Has No Clothes. I can't think of the author, but I had to do a book review on it for Press TV, the Iranian TV. And it showed how America was building an empire, like Rome. They wanted to dominate the world, but here it's a capitalist machine to make money through war and to have lives lost. We should have learned the lesson of Vietnam, a war that we got involved in. 58,000 young Americans lost their lives. Those that survived, and some of them still are in bad shape. Go through the streets of Harlem, New York, and look at the homeless men over 55 years old. Many of them were in Vietnam. Many of them never got their lives together. So a black man goes before the UN, Colin Powell, a brother that we had respect for his military ability, born right here in the South Bronx, and the same hospital Minister Farrakhan was born in. But he got involved in the military. And then when he became the Secretary of State, and a soldier obeys orders, his boss told him to go before the UN and tell this lie so we can get into Iraq and get those oil fields of Iraq. And so he went before the world and spent this fantastic lie about nuclear weapons that Saddam Hussein had, and he was a danger to the entire world. And there's Negroponte and all of those in the struggle know him and know his bloody history in Central America. He's sitting behind him rubbing his hands. But they put a black man out front to do their dirty deed. That's why Colin Powell today is a hurt man. He's a shattered man. Because he knew that he lied for the government. 4,500 young soldiers died in Iraq. According to the day's newspaper, 32,000 seriously wounded. And the rest of them are on drugs, shooting their wives, committing suicide over a lie to get some oil out of Iraq. Then when they finally captured Saddam Hussein, drugged him up, put him on television, probing his mouth and all of that, then they sent him to trial for putting down a rebellion in his own country. And then on the Eid day, the holy day of the Muslim, it's like on Christmas morning, you hang him in America. And I was proud of him as another Muslim, because all of them said he's not a Muslim, he's a hypocrite, but he said his shahada. And then they let in his enemies with little cameras to film him, because they thought he was going to cry like a baby and plead for his life. He said his shahada and looked at those who was taking pictures of it. You go to hell, and they hung him and killed him. So I'm showing you a picture that we cannot let this history be repeated. This is an invasion of Africa. This is bombing an African country. And this is because they know that what Gaddafi was doing with the wealth of Libya, not only taking care of the Libyan people, but he was also taking care of Africa. He moved the African Union forward. He said when he went to Algeria in 1999, he hadn't been to an OAU meeting since '83, and he didn't respect the OAU. But he went because the African nations broke the sanctions of the UN and America. He said to the African brothers, he said, unless you unite, unless you go back to what Dr. Kwame Nkrumah said, unless you go back to what Gamal Nasser said, unless you go back to what Keita said, he said that we will all be destroyed. Little countries like the Gambia, Burkina Faso, or Guinea-Bissau, countries like the Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, countries like Equatorial Guinea, countries like San Tome, and countries like Djibouti, and all of these Swaziland, all of these little countries across Africa, they said they will go. They'll be like Somalia, a failed state. You must unite. And America looked at that. The largest trading partner with Africa is not China, but it's the United States of America. And there's two countries that they need the oil from, that's Nigeria and Libya. And when Barack went before the public, and I'm closing soon, when Barack went before the public, he said, he should have said to you, I'm going to invade Libya. And I'm going to lead the attack on Libya. But don't worry, American people. The only thing that will happen is your gas is going to go up to $4, maybe $5 a gallon. So this is why an election is coming, and he pulled out the gas reserve the other day to bring it down, to prepare to try to get another term. But we cannot give him another term if this is the way he's thinking about Africa and the black world. So, you got to work with your Congress people. You got someone like Cynthia McKinney can tell you what moved Congress people. You got to be able to roll them out. And the black congressmen who could not stand up, and women who could not stand up because they got a black man in the White House, we got to wake up. Bob Law warned me about this a long time. We used to have arguments about Barack Obama. But they have to feel the pressure of this community, that without this community, he cannot get a second term, and we got to work on it. We got to get all of the progressive forces together. We got to bombard the White House with emails and letters. We got to call Barack and say, you messing up, brother. You got to get it right, or otherwise we're going to roll you out of here. Thank you. May God bless you. As most of you know, I went to Guyana to do some humanitarian work, and they arrested me and said the CIA told them I was a drug dealer and a terrorist, that I came down to do a terrorist act. Now, there's a copy of what happened to me in the final call. Those who may not have read it or saw it. But what I'm doing is, I talked to the lawyers yesterday in Washington. We're doing a lawsuit for $15 million. Okay? So you need to say a special prayer in church tomorrow that I win this law case. But this is the story, and I told my brothers from Guyana I'm not going to let it go. And the CIA said, well, we didn't say nothing. I don't know, you lie. And Kwame said that you're consistent. You don't lie sometimes, you lie all the time. Okay? But I want you to read the article. The tape of Minister Farrakhan is on the table in the back, and there's a letter back there to the President Jagdeo of Guyana. And I want an apology from him, because as that information about me went viral all over the world. I got calls from Africa, from the Caribbean, and everybody was concerned. Those who know me know that it was a lie, but those who just know my name say, yeah, he's one of them Muslims. See, that's what those Muslims do. So we got to make sure that this doesn't happen, and yes, I'm defending my name and my reputation. This is character assassination, defamation of character, but also I'm doing this for Muslims. When it happens to you, don't go in your corner, make your prayers and thank Allah you got out of it, but you got to make some noise. We are descendants of slaves. We know from slavery, if he howls, let him go. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Brother Muhammad. So, we're honored tonight to introduce our featured speaker for tonight, Ms. Cynthia McKinney. Ms. McKinney served as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives and ran a spirited campaign for president in 2008. She is a powerful commentator on domestic and foreign policy and recently traveled to Libya on her second fact-finding mission. So please, everyone, let's give a very warm welcome to Ms. Cynthia.
I want to thank the Answer Coalition. The Answer Coalition has been through a lot. And they've been through that demonization as well. And I watched as the anti-war movement was split in two. And it was because special interests wanted to control our ability to say no to war. And Answer stood firm as they are standing firm today. So thank you, Answer. I have a video, and we're going to look at about 10 to 15 minutes of the video. And then we're going to, the video is about an hour long. We'll drop the volume, and then you'll continue to see the images as we go through our question and answer period. So now, you've heard from Sasha and Don and Brian and Ramsey and Viola and Akbar. And I have to say that for the reason I went to Libya and put together the Dignity Delegation of investigative journalists and my lawyer was because of all of the things that they have said. And honestly, another factor came into my consciousness, and that is the fact that during the time that I was in Congress, I was asked to take positions that were absolutely not true. But people wanted to use my black face in order to put forward their own agenda. And their own agenda was anti-black. So they wanted to use the integrity that I had. They wanted me to lease it to them for a small price with the promise. In fact, one person, a media person from New York, told me that if I just took a particular stand against Sudan, that I could be in Congress for the rest of my life. But what they wanted me to say was a lie. And I did my research, as I always do my research, and I understood that what they were asking me to say was not true, and so therefore I declined. I was out of office a few months later. But this leasing of the black face and oppressing people of color within blackface was something that moved me. And in fact, when I filed those articles of impeachment against George Bush and Dick Cheney, it was important for me to include Condoleezza Rice, because this is the sister who knowingly chose the wrong side.
That's right.
And I went into an elementary school in my district as I was trying to campaign for re-election, and their biggest day, the school in Black History Month is celebrating who else but Condoleezza Rice.
Wow.
So Condoleezza Rice becomes the role model for our young people. Colin Powell, who lied to the world, becomes a role model for our young people. And so this is what they want us to become, but this is certainly not what I can countenance. Am blessed to be able to travel around the world, one of the things that sticks out to me is how Black America at one point had moral authority no matter where you went in the world. If you had a USA passport and your skin was black, you were respected. You were loved. Because people around the world understood our struggle. They understood our oppression, and they understood our resistance to the imperial face of the United States. But not so anymore. How long do you think we're going to get a free pass? And now, the ultimate insult to my integrity is that we have a black man bombing Africa. It's the ultimate insult. So I almost didn't have any choice but to put together a delegation of investigative journalists, because we were being lied to, and of course we know we've always been lied to. Our memory isn't so short. We haven't forgotten Iraq. 935 times our elected leaders lied to us.
Come on.
And the media knowingly lied to us by repeating their lies. But we also know that the media is accustomed to telling the government's lies, because those of us who are students of the counterintelligence program understand very well that the mighty Wurlitzer has been played on behalf of the government as it targeted blacks, Latinos, Chicanos, you name it, anybody who was resisting and dared to dissent from U.S. oppressive policy got targeted. And the media demonized them. And that was a part of the neutralization of real leadership, authentic leadership in our community. So anyway, just yesterday, a U.S. admiral admitted that the NATO mission was to kill Muammar Gaddafi. Now, I don't have the personal history, but I know that members of the Black Panther Party, SNCC, All African People's Revolutionary Party were welcomed in Libya by Muammar Gaddafi.
Right.
And so, what gives our country, or more pointedly, what gives Barack Obama the right to target and kill somebody? It's against international law.
That's right.
It's against every aspect of international law, and it's against U.S. law. So, one of the things that I saw when I was there was the place that was bombed in 1986 where Muammar Gaddafi's daughter was murdered. And they have turned it into like a little museum where you can see fragments of the bomb, and you can see the room where she was killed, and everything is pretty much intact, the holes in the ceiling and all of that. And when the United States decided that they were going to launch these bombs and missiles, and that one of their targets was going to be Al-Azizia, which is the name of that compound, which in Arabic, I understand, but I don't speak Arabic, means the door, and it was called that because Muammar Gaddafi had opened up Libya to Africans in the diaspora to come back to Africa. One of the things that has happened now is that people have gathered around Al-Azizia. They actually live in the compound. So every time you hear that NATO has launched a bombing raid against Muammar Gaddafi's residential compound, is the way they put it, that means that NATO has targeted civilians. And that is a war crime. The civilians, they know that the civilians are there. And every night, these civilians have a party. They are so defiant, and they have lost all fear. They said if they are going to try and kill our leader, then we will go to the place that they bombed to protect our leader. That's what they told me. And there are supporters there in their tents from Algeria and Tunisia as well. Approximately 50% of the people of Libya look like me. And what NATO has unleashed is a race war. Because now you've got these lighter-skinned Libyans who are lynching the darker-skinned Libyans who look like me.
Wow.
And one of the things that was clearly noticeable is that the darker-skinned Libyans love Muammar Gaddafi. And at Al-Azizia, you have them of all colors and complexions, but by and large, they are largely the Libyans of darker skin. They have gone there to defend their leader, the leader who protects them. There is real insecurity now on the part of the Libyans of darker skin, even in Tripoli, because they don't know who's going to come up behind them and attack them. So this is a very, very serious issue. One of the other things that I was able to witness was the family of you've seen the image of Hisham, who was a Libyan darker skinned soldier who was hanged from a building. He was targeted. The Libyan NATO allies, the so-called rebels, have a penchant for using their cell phones, the cameras on their cell phones. So they took the cell phone of Hisham and they called the family and got one of the brothers and told one of the brothers, "We've got your brother. Is he really a Libyan?" And the brother said, "Of course he's a Libyan." And, said the town, which I can't remember where the family is from. The next day, they called again on Hisham's cell phone and said, "We're going to kill your brother, and we want you to watch it on Al Jazeera." And that's exactly what happened. Can you imagine getting that kind of a phone call? And all of this was because our U.S. ambassador to the UN, Susan Rice, used the word mercenary in her remarks on UN Security Council resolution number 1973, and the media blew that all out of proportion, that Gaddafi had imported African black mercenaries. That's how it started. And so now an entire community that consists of approximately half of the population of Libya lives in great insecurity because of what I call the reintroduction of Willie Horton politics onto the African continent. The last thing that I want to mention in terms of the eyewitness is the impact of NATO's activities on the people. They claim that they are responsible for a humanitarian intervention, but they are creating a humanitarian crisis because they have formed a blockade. One thing, just like I call it the Israelization of NATO policy, because the Libyan fishermen are not allowed to fish in Libya's waters, just like the fishermen of Gaza are not allowed to fish in Gaza's territorial waters. And so you've seen the entire decimation of the fishing industry and the trade as a result of that. But not only does not NATO blockade the fishing trade, they also refuse to allow medication, food, and fuel to come into the country, even as they are bombing and maiming and killing people. So you can see for literally kilometers, tens of kilometers, 3 and 4 aisles or cars deep, rows deep, cars lined up waiting to get gasoline. There is no gasoline, and they produce oil. And they sent a woman to Italy to try and get some medicine, and the Italian government refused to allow her to take the medicine, and the Libyans have the wherewithal to pay. But because of the NATO blockade, they couldn't even import the medicine. So this is a horrible thing that is criminal in its conduct because it truly is targeting civilians. And I would like to live to see the day when the United States can elect a president who is not a war criminal.
Thank you.
Did this is because at the end of the day, I am so sick and tired of war, and I wanted to do what my leaders before me have told us that we have to do, including the words of Mario Savio, who said that we have to put our entire bodies against the gears and the levers and the wheels of the machine. And we have to say to the owners of the machine, either you stop it or we'll stop it. That's